So what if I told you there's this single invisible number that pretty much dictates whether our whole economy is running hot or cold? I mean, it's a number central bankers are absolutely obsessed with. But here's the catch. They can't actually see it. Today, we're diving into an economic detective story. We're going to uncover how we even try to measure this hidden force, and this is the crazy part, how just one tiny change in a single assumption can completely rewrite the entire story of our economic health.
Okay, so at the heart of this whole mystery is a really simple question. What is the economy's natural speed limit? Think about it like a car. It has an optimal speed, right? A sweet spot. Well, the economy has one too. A rate where it can just grow steadily without, overheating into crazy high inflation or stalling out completely into a recession. The big trick, though, is how in the world do you find that number?
Well, economists have a name for this speed limit. They call it the natural rate of interest, or as you'll hear it called, R-star. The best way to think about it is like an invisible thermostat for the economy. So when the Fed sets its interest rate below R-star, it's like cranking up the heat. You're encouraging borrowing and spending and growth. But if they set it above R-star, they're cooling things down. It is without a doubt the single most important benchmark for all of monetary policy. But, and this is the huge problem, R-star is unobservable. You can't just Google it. You have to estimate it. And that right there is where our whole story really begins.
So for years, there's been this one standard story about R-star, a narrative that has really shaped how policymakers see the entire world. And it's a pretty gloomy story, one of a steady, persistent decline.
And this story, it was built using a really powerful tool, the Laubach and Williams model, or just the LW model for short. For a long time, this was the absolute go-to method, kind of the gold standard for trying to get a peek at this invisible number.
And wow, this is the picture that model painted. Take a look. That red line, that's its estimate of R-star. You can just see this long, grinding decline for decades. And then, look what happens after the 2008 financial crisis. It just flatlines. No recovery, no bounce back, nothing. This one chart suggested that the economy's engine had basically stalled out at this new, depressingly low level.
And you have to understand, this wasn't just some academic debate in an ivory tower. No way. This chart literally kept central bankers up at night. This story of a permanently lower R-star, it fueled this big idea of secular stagnation. It's this belief that the economy was just stuck in a low-growth trap, and maybe forever. But what if that story was wrong? What if the tool itself was actually shaping the conclusion? That's the exact question a 2017 Federal Reserve paper by Kurt Lewis and Francisco Vázquez Grande decided to ask. They looked at all this and decided to re-examine the evidence, but through a completely different lens. Okay, so their first step was actually pretty profound. They took the exact same model and the exact same data, but they ran it with a different statistical engine. Instead of the standard method, they used something called Bayesian estimation. Now, just think of it this way. Instead of spitting out a single best guess, Bayesian methods look at a whole range of possibilities all at once. That makes them way better at handling the deep uncertainty that comes with trying to measure something you can't even see.
And the impact of just that one change, it's stunning. Look at this. The old red line is still there, right? Smooth, pessimistic. But the new blue line, man, it tells a totally different story. It's way more volatile. Yeah, it dives deeper in recessions. But, and this is the crucial part, after 2008, it actually starts to bounce back. All of a sudden, that whole story of no recovery doesn't seem so certain anymore, does it?
So just by changing the statistical technique, a whole new picture starts to emerge. R-star seems to react way more dramatically to the business cycle. And most importantly, it's showing signs of life after the Great Recession. This completely challenges the idea that the economy was just stuck in some permanent funk. But believe it or not, the real discovery, that was still to come. See, this investigation went deeper than just playing with the statistics. The researchers found a single, incredibly powerful assumption buried deep inside the original model. It's an assumption that changed everything, and it boils down to this. Is economic damage permanent, or is it temporary?
The original model, the one that gave us that depressing red line, was built on one core belief, that major negative shocks, like a massive financial crisis, leave permanent scars on the economy's natural interest rate.
Let's make that super simple. The old model, it treats a financial crisis like a chronic illness, something that permanently lowers the economy's overall health. So the researchers asked a really simple question. What if it's more like a really bad flu? Something that just completely knocks you out for a while, but that you eventually recover from. So they decided to test what would happen if those shocks were allowed to be temporary. And the result of changing that one single assumption, It didn't just tweak the results. Oh no, it created a radically, completely different picture of the entire post-crisis economy.
And here it is. This is the final verdict. On one side, you've got the original red line, telling a story of stagnation. On the other, you have the new blue line from the model that allows for recovery. And it's not just a little bounce back anymore. It is a strong, sustained recovery that brings R-star almost all the way back to where it was before the crisis.
The story just completely flips on its head. Instead of an economy suffering from a permanent, chronic illness, what we see is an economy that was hit, incredibly hard, for sure, but then demonstrated amazing resilience. And it all happened just by changing one little assumption, from permanent damage to temporary setback.
Okay, let's put some hard numbers on this to see how big a deal this is. According to the original story, the old model by the end of 2016, the natural rate of interest was basically zero. Zero. The economy's engine was just idling, going absolutely nowhere.
But under the new model, the estimate for that exact same period is 1.8%. That is a massive, massive difference. I mean, that's the difference between an economy that's on life support and one that's back up on its feet and walking around.
So, why does all of this matter so much? Well, because our understanding of the economy isn't, a direct photograph of reality. It's more like a picture drawn by our models, and every single one of those models is built on assumptions.
And here's the thing. This wasn't just a matter of, oh, I like this story better. No, the statistical tests that Lewis and Vasquez Grande ran showed substantial evidence that the data itself actually prefers the story of temporary shocks and recovery. The numbers were practically screaming that the economy is way more resilient than that old model ever allowed it to be. The implications of this are just huge. It suggests that the entire narrative of secular stagnation, it might have just been an illusion, created by one hidden assumption in one model. It means all those post-crisis headwinds people talked about were maybe more like a nasty storm we passed through, not a permanent change in the whole climate. And for policymakers, it suggests the economy might have a much, much higher speed limit than they've been led to believe.
The authors themselves really put it best. They basically said the only way you can get that story of a permanently low R-star is if you force the model to assume that the damage from the crisis was permanent. If you don't force that assumption on it, the data itself tells you a story of recovery.
And all of this really leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. This entire economic drama, the global debate between stagnation and resilience, it all hinged on one hidden assumption in a spreadsheet. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other economic truths that shape our entire world are also just one little assumption away from being completely and totally wrong?